Hey, Mike Rain here with Canadian Musician right now at the Gladstone Hotel in the West End of Toronto. And with me is the lovely Eleanor McCain. Eleanor, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you? Nice to be here to talk to you.
Absolutely. And of course, the reason we're here is because of your new double album called True North, the Canadian Songbook. You may have guessed from the title that is a collection of covers that Eleanor has recorded with various symphonies across the country, covering classic Canadian pop songs, and 32 songs in total. There's a multimedia project, but I don't want to do all the talking here, so of course, let's get into it. But first, I guess just let's start with the conceptualization of True North. Where did the initial idea for a album of Canadian classic songs come from?
It came actually about 3 years ago in 2014. I was just finishing Runaway, my last album, and it was an album of classic love songs reimagined for orchestra. And I'd been working with symphonies in recent years, and I was thinking about what my next project would be, even though I hadn't even released Runaway yet. And the idea of doing Canadian music came up. And at the time, I had recorded that album in Moscow. I felt some guilt about that because I'd been working with Canadian orchestras. Okay. I know how wonderful they are, yes. And I thought, okay, Canadian music. It's just it actually was built on a maritime idea I'd had many years ago as well. So to do something on a national scope for Canada's 150th, and then work with Canadian orchestras was really the germ of the idea, and it was to take some of our most iconic music and reimagine it for orchestra. And then I thought, but how do you choose just one orchestra? Yes. Because I had developed relationships with various orchestras and I didn't want to choose. Yes. And I thought that what a great story for Canada to talk not just about our songwriting tradition, but also to talk about how incredible our orchestras are. Yes. And so in the end, we have 10 orchestras from coast to coast. And along with that, because I've been reimagining music for orchestra, I know how talented our arrangers are as well. And I thought, again, to create the pan-Canadian concept, it would be really wonderful to showcase arrangers from across the country. So there are 14 arrangers involved.
Very cool. The 32 songs, there's hundreds, thousands, of course, that you could have chosen. What was that process of choosing which songs you would record? And were there many that you knew before any of this started, I'm definitely doing that song, and were there others that maybe popped up by surprise? Mm-hmm.
It's immediately, as soon as the idea came, I sat down and tried to create a song list to work with. Yes, there's the book.
Okay, we'll be getting into.
Shameless self-promotion. So there were songs originally, like when I looked at the list, I sat down and researched songwriting, and I wanted to make sure I pushed myself into areas that might not be as familiar. Yeah. But there were some obvious ones, like Snowbird, I think is a classic, iconic song for us as a nation, and Four Strong Winds, or If You Could Read My Mind by Gordon Lightfoot. It is, and he's a great songwriter. And just, the works of Neil Young, Bruce Cockburn, Joni Mitchell, Bryan Adams, Sarah McLachlan. So I spent a lot of time listening to that kind of music, and then others. Yeah. I had a list of about 27 songs in the first year that I lived with and felt pretty comfortable with. I mean, to me, this is about ultimately the Canadian Songbook and celebrating our songwriters. And this isn't, I think it's a good representation, but it's not definitive. As you mentioned, there are so many. Yeah. It's about the fact that there's been a lot of celebration by artists around the world of the American Songbook, and I think that this is a time when we can celebrate the Canadian Songbook because we have such a rich tradition. And so these are my renditions of songs that suit my style, and I tried to push myself into areas to be as diverse as possible. But there's so many songs out there that aren't on this album that should be covered and carried on into the future. And I think it's a sign of a good song when it does carry on past the generation that it sort of lived in originally, If it keeps going on for generations to come, it's a great song, and especially when you can reimagine it many, many different ways, too.
Speaking of reimagining, one of the songs that you did was Leonard Cohen's classic Hallelujah, which I don't have the stats in front of me, but I guess it's probably one of the most covered songs of all time. And also can be just a daunting song, I know, for a lot of performers because of that history and inevitable comparisons and all that come along with it. Did you have, of all the Leonard Cohen songs Did you have any hesitancy about taking on Hallelujah and thoughts on how you could make it your own?
It was definitely all that. It was when I looked at his work, it was the first song I thought about. I've always loved the song. It's everyone. I think I don't really know anyone who doesn't like that song. It is truly iconic. It was the one I was most drawn to, and yet I did look at other songs to just make sure because of that reason. I thought, it is one of those songs that is very treasured. I love Katie Lang's version of it. But it was, I like to draw on, I like to be very authentic with everything that I do, and it was the one that I was most connected to, so I chose that one. But it's interesting, to your point, I had a lot of people say along the way, okay, which Leonard Cohen song did you do? I hope you didn't do a Hallelujah. And then, or I'd get, I hope you did Hallelujah. You'd get one or the other, and because of exactly that, it's so treasured by so many people. Yeah.
Were you looking for songs that were, I guess, Canadian in subject matter or in another sense, or was simply really the only criteria was that it was written by a Canadian?
Definitely had to be a Canadian songwriter. Yeah. And, the ultimate criteria for me is being emotionally connected to a song, because that's really why I sing. It's, I don't write music. I interpret music, and I always, and it's really, I sing because I love how music is emotionally expressive, and it heightens our awareness and emotion in that we're feeling. But it was interesting because when it came down to some songwriters like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell or Ron Hines from Newfoundland, I had a couple of songs that were on my list, on that playlist that I kind of lived with, and I was thinking, which one should I do? With Ron Hines, Sonny's Dream is one of his most iconic songs as well. But what I loved about No Change in Me is it really spoke about Newfoundland and Newfoundlanders having to leave, and what their feeling about that, having to leave to find work. And the same thing with Neil Young's Helpless. I loved the song and I felt connected to it, but I especially love the fact that it starts with "There is a town in North Ontario," or "A Case of You" says "Oh Canada," because Joni Mitchell has so much great music. Obviously, it was still my favorite, I think, to do for this album, but it was, when I was going between a few songs, I really wanted to speak about that. And another song, "The Island" from Cape Breton, written by Kenzie McNeil. It was, it's a song about Cape Breton and the Men of the Deeps, the coal mining choir from there. They're on the album and they're on this track. And it really, again, much like the No Change in Me, it really speaks about life in Cape Breton and about people settling there and life of coal miners. And so I think I loved that part too, that it wasn't just about the emotional content, but really about speaking about certain things in Canada.
You mentioned that you're not a writer, you're an interpreter, singer of songs. But throughout this process, for how you're going to sing them and how the orchestras are going to perform them, there's a lot of deconstructing of the original song that needs to be done. Did that kind of teach you about composition? Like, what lessons were you able to take out of that deconstruction process?
I'm still not a songwriter. But I do, because of the interpreting side, I mean, Don Breithaupt is the incredible producer on this album. And, he's been an incredible leader on this album from that perspective. I think what I've learned this is my 6th album, so learned throughout all of them is just some ways to truly convey the emotion of a song and different ways to do that. So maybe I don't consider myself a songwriter, so less about that, but more about just what is going to really heighten the emotion of a song, and that I've learned over the years and through this process, and there's so many incredible guest artists who've contributed, not just the orchestras, to the album, and really made some beautiful, really special moments. Yeah.
Timing-wise, it's obviously perfect time for a project like this, with being Canada's 150th birthday. Was that anniversary, that moment for Canada, was that part of this project going back to the beginning, or was it more just a happy coincidence timing-wise?
It was always part of the concept, just in terms of the timing of the release, because I think there's a huge conversation going on this year about celebrating Canada. I do feel that this is an ongoing, timeless project because I think one of our, most celebrated values is that we're all modest Canadians, and maybe too much so. We don't celebrate our culture and our artists and our landscape and our values. I don't think we celebrate that enough. Yeah. So I hope that this is a timeless project, but I think it's very timely. It was designed to be released now because we are focused on celebrating our country. Yeah.
Beyond the album itself, it's I don't know if it. Well, first of all, was this the concept from the beginning? There's the coffee table book that's here with us. There's also a. Oh, really?
Here. I'll do that while you.
Sure, but there's obviously this very substantive coffee table book that's here. There's a documentary along to go with it. Was this also part of? There we go. Were these additional visual elements part of the project from the beginning, or did they start? I guess those ideas come along when the album was already for the book and for the documentary?
So what happened that year that I was thinking about it was I realized that the music business was changing. People weren't buying CDs the same way. And so I had to find a new way to really bring this music. If it was going to jump into this really massive project, I thought I have to find some way to really bring awareness to it. And at the same time, I was listening to the music. I was thinking about the Canadian landscape and how extraordinary it is, and beautiful, and diverse, and how lucky we are. And my daughter had purchased 2 CDs that year, and they came in the form of a book with her favorite band. And when I looked at it, I thought, okay, that makes sense to me, because what's going on in my head visually with the Canadian landscape could be translated into a book to go along with the music. And so that's kind of where the germ of the idea started. And then I really wanted to create this combination of book and CD. I worked with Tony Hauser, who is a portrait photographer in Toronto. And I'd known him for many years, and I turned to him to ask him for some advice, because I don't know anything about writing a book, and I don't know anything about photography. And so I told him the concept, and he said, would you like me to work with you on this, and I'll kind of come and edit it for you? And I said, great. So he researched all the landscape photographers with his assistant, Sarah, and they collected over 400 images. And then we sat down and matched a landscape with each song. And again, the landscapes come from all across the country, and there are 22 photographers who contributed. And they're stunning. It really does represent how gorgeous our country is. It's really, I've been lucky to see a lot through this trip, but it's inspired me to see more as a result of it. And then because Tony's a portrait photographer, I asked him to also contribute some photos. So I said, let's take some pictures of our own through the landscape. So we chose 8 locations, and I asked my friend and stylist Wendy Natale if she would help with finding Canadian fashion designers to contribute gowns for the photos as well, so we could showcase their work too. And then over the last couple of years, as we started to work with Page 2 Strategies, our publisher in Vancouver, we started to expand the idea and the concept of the book, and it developed into asking Greg Locke, who is a wonderful photographer from Newfoundland, to travel with us during our orchestra sessions to take behind-the-scenes photographs. So we really get to see everybody working and really showing off, the guest artists and the orchestras. And we reached out to the songwriters, and they contributed songwriting, commentary, for the album, as well as some of the team members contributed commentary. We have song lyrics in the book, and a few introductory messages as well that talk about the making of the album. So it's morphed into so much more. It's 220 pages. It's bilingual. I think it's beautiful. I love it's. You can also be used as for biceps, bicep curls. I've done that.
I haven't seen it myself, but I understand that there's a short documentary to go along with that. Essentially, what aspect of the project or the vision does that cover? Is it a making of the album, the project, or is it something separate from that?
It's being edited as we speak. But the concept is when again, it's another thing that I didn't know anything about. So I just knew that I wanted to capture the footage, and so we kind of developed the idea as we went along. But it is essentially a making of, and from the beginning to end, there were a lot of interviews from musicians, team members, guest artists to really talk about what it means to be Canadian, being a Canadian artist, lots of different angles, but focused mostly around that. And it'll probably end up being about 30-ish minutes, I think, and it'll be hopefully, we're aiming somewhere between July and September that it'll be released. Yeah.
Keep an eye out for that. And I guess lastly, have you gotten much feedback from the folks whose songs you've performed?
It hasn't gotten out yet. You got an early copy. So we haven't really shared it yet. Yeah. So it's new. But whoever has heard it has been really embraced it, and I've been very, very blessed with that. And I think it's a real celebration of Canada, so I'm really excited to share all of it with everyone.
Very cool. And just there's one more thing I wanted to ask out of curiosity, because, like you said, there's 10 orchestras that perform on the album that span the entire country from Halifax to Victoria, I believe it is. You're already very familiar with the various professional orchestras across Canada, but did you find that they each kind of brought a different voice or tone or vibe to the songs? Like, to your ears, can you hear, that's the Halifax Orchestra, that's the National Centre Orchestra? Are they unique in that way to you?
It's a good question, but what was interesting is how they all blended actually quite well together. They're all excellent orchestras, and sometimes we had to make decisions based on some are smaller and some are larger. So if an orchestration required a bigger orchestra, then we put that chart with that orchestra. But they all sounded fantastic, and one of the things that we were concerned about with this pan-Canadian concept was how to record it and make sure that all the venues, because you get into different venues and the acoustics can make a difference on the recording. But John Bailey was our main engineer. He did the mixing and recording for mic vocals and this track, the band sessions, and guest artists. But Jeremy Toos did all the on-site recording of the orchestras. He has a mobile kit. It's actually one of the really fascinating parts of this project is that he was able to do this. He had a mobile kit, and he and his team, and they traveled from venue to venue with their whole thing and set up. And because of he recorded it so beautifully, they sound really great together. You don't feel like, okay, that's that orchestra. They work really well together, and they're all excellent.
And, so when does the project drop?
May 12th, but it's available for pre-order on Amazon, Indigo, and on iTunes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Eleanor, again, this has been Eleanor McCain with True North, the Canadian Songbook, as I fling the cover across the table here. But the project is out May 12th. And Eleanor, first time meeting you. It's been lovely talking with you. Thank you for this.
It's great to meet you, and thanks for having me today.
Cheers.